Coming up on Arirang News, the United States signals that it will support a global lifting of patent protections for COVID-19 vaccines to help boost production and get vaccines to as many people as possible. It's a move welcomed by many, but not the pharmaceutical industry. South Korea starts taking reservations from senior citizens over the age of 70 who will be able to start getting vaccinated later this month. As rollout speeds up, success, it seems, will depend on people's willingness to take part. And the South Korean property market this year is expected to see a record number of new homes, around 500,000 new units, many of them provided by the government. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The Biden administration says it will support a temporary patent waiver around the world for COVID-19 vaccines. That would enable more countries to produce them, which is getting support from countries struggling to get supplies. But the pharmaceutical industry is opposed to the idea. Kim Jae-hee reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden has expressed support for a temporary waiver of intellectual property protections on COVID-19 vaccines.
President Biden, you're going to back a waiver of at the WTO. Are you going to back that? Is the U.S. government
going to back that?
Yes,
I'm talking about that later today, yes.
U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai, in a statement on Wednesday, said the Biden administration believes strongly in intellectual property protections, but in order to end the global health crisis, it supports the waiver of such protections for vaccines. She also stressed that the administration aims to provide safe and effective vaccines to as many people as soon as possible. Soon after the statement was released, the WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus welcomed the U.S. support, hailing it as a monumental moment in the fight against the pandemic. He tweeted on Wednesday that the support from U.S. is a powerful example of leadership to address the global health crisis. On the other hand, the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, whose members include major pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and AstraZeneca, expressed disappointment, saying that a waiver is the wrong answer to a complex problem. This comes amid India and South Africa calling on the World Trade Organization to waive patents for vaccines. Despite U.S. support, one expert notes the negotiations to drop a Pacific waiver plan could take some time.
Stances differ between advanced countries and developing countries and vaccine producers and vaccine recipient countries. Also, the government and private companies may not share the same stance. The chances are it will take quite a long time for all 164 WTO member countries to find common ground, let alone come up with a specific action plan.
He added patent waivers might expand the global supply of COVID-19 vaccines and benefit some countries in the long term, but the short-term impact would likely be minimal. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
And South Korea is preparing to roll out vaccines to people aged 60 to 74. Reservations started this morning for people over 70. They can get their first shots from May 27th. Vaccines are arriving on time as planned, with the country receiving more than 400,000 Pfizer doses today. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
South Korea on Thursday began accepting reservations for COVID-19 vaccines for the next group of senior citizens. This round will cover people aged 60 to 74 using the AstraZeneca shot. Vaccinations have already started for people over 75 who are getting the Pfizer vaccine. Reservations for this next round will start with the oldest group on May 6, those aged 70 to 74. Those 65 to 69 are next on May 10th, followed by the rest 3 days later. The actual inoculations will start on May 27 for those aged 65 to 74 and from June 6 for those aged 60 to 64. This comes after the government decided to ramp up the vaccination campaign by doing the 60 to 64s earlier than previously planned.
Vaccinating the over 60s is the most effective way to contain transmission among our seniors and to prevent severe disease or death should they be infected.
Data shows that seniors over the age of 65 have the lowest chances of vaccine side effects at less than 0.2%. Anaphylaxis is found to be very rare for all ages, with only 30 cases confirmed since vaccination started in February. With inoculations well underway, vaccine doses arriving in Korea on time with no delays so far. The country received an additional 436,000 doses from Pfizer on Thursday, which adds up to more than 1.1 million doses available for rollout immediately. And by the end of June, Korea is expected to receive some 5 million more Pfizer doses and 7.2 million AstraZeneca doses. Experts say the success of the vaccination campaign now depends on public confidence. And the latest government survey shows around 61% of people said they do intend to get vaccinated. 이경은, 아리랑 뉴스.
The amount of new housing supplied in South Korea this year is expected to hit an all-time high. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said Thursday that roughly 500,000 new homes will be going onto the market in 2021. This includes private housing, which will account for around 360,000 to 390,000 units. Public housing is forecast to be at 92,000 units. The government will announce new sites for public housing this month as it aims to cool the overheated real estate market. The premium on Korean government bonds, which is a barometer of the country's risk of default, has dropped to its lowest level since the 2008 global financial crisis. According to the Finance Ministry, the credit default swap premium, or CDS, on the country's 5-year foreign exchange stabilization bond traded at 19 basis points on Wednesday. That's the lowest since April 2007, when it hit an all-time low of 14 basis points. Globally, that puts South Korea at the 17th lowest rate and the lowest among emerging economies. A lower CDS premium means foreign investors have a positive view of the Korean economy. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi on Facebook attributed the sharp decline to confidence in the Korean economy due to its rapid recovery in the pandemic. Data show online shopping in South Korea surged in March, driven by increased orders of delivery food, groceries, and home appliances. According to Statistics Korea, the value of online shopping transactions in March came to more than $14 billion, up almost 26.5% on year. Food delivery rose by more than 60%, and groceries and home appliances by more than 20%. Almost 70% of all transactions were done by smartphone. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon. Thank you for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, let's start with some remarks by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who said at a seminar this week that she thinks interest rates may have to rise somewhat to keep the economy from overheating with all this stimulus. But she later walked back those comments, saying she's not predicting an inflation problem. Tell us what you think about this and what you think the prospects are for rising rates.
Ms. Yellen suggested earlier Tuesday that the central bank has to raise rates to keep the economy from overheating if Biden administration's roughly $4 trillion spending plans are enacted. But as you said, Devin, she walked back her comments earlier in the day by saying that she's neither predicting nor recommending that Fed increases interest rate as a result of President Biden's spending plans. But Ms. Yellen's interest rate comments illustrates the market's greatest worry because U.S. economy is recovering from the pandemic shock quickly from the beginning of this year with 2.6% inflation rate and more than 6% economic growth on annual basis. So even though U.S. Fed does not respond the comments from Ms. Yellen, it is true that the possibility of raising interest rate by U.S. Fed is intensified.
So if there is a growing risk of rates rising, it would seem that would apply to the Bank of Korea too, which would be put in a similar position. For last month, consumer prices in Korea rose by more than 2%. What do you make of that situation? Is it something we should worry about?
That is a really crucial and great question, Devin. I think Bank of Korea is not likely to raise interest rate preemptively before U.S. Fed does. If we take a look at Korean economy situation, the pressure on raising interest rate is intensifying. For example, April's inflation rate increased up to 2.3% on annual basis, and market interest rate represented by a 3-year government bond rate increased by 0.3% compared to the end of last year. But it won't be easy for Bank of Korea to interest rate because economic recovery is about to begin as of now, and household huge debt will be very dangerous if interest rate is increased.
Well, turning to the markets, Professor, stocks this week on Wall Street have been mixed. On Wednesday, more companies posted strong earnings, and signs of an economic recovery lifted the Dow to a new high. A decline on the Nasdaq, though. What's the story in the global markets?
U.S. market is mixed between Dow Jones and Nasdaq yesterday. Dow Jones Industrial increased by 0.3%, along with a robust U.S. economic recovery and major corporations, a great performance. But Ms. Yellen's comments on increasing interest rate cooled down high-tech stocks in Nasdaq. Finally, Nasdaq had, in aggregate, had a negative 0.4% return yesterday. European markets in London, Paris, and Frankfurt all gained over 1 to 2% yesterday, with improved business profits in Europe.
And here in Korea today, stocks started out lower but posted a decent gain for the day, seeming to reflect those gains in the U.S. When the Korean markets were closed yesterday for Children's Day. Tell us about the local markets.
Domestic market had a decent returns today. Until Monday of this week, domestic market had negative returns over 5 straight trading days in both of KOSPI and KOSDAQ. But today, domestic market shrugged up previous negative returns with 1% return in KOSPI and 0.3% return in KOSDAQ. It was impressive because this positive return was achieved under a higher possibility in raising interest rates. The rise in both markets were led by institutional investors in KOSPI and individual investors in KOSDAQ.
And finally, Professor, household borrowing in Korea has been increasing again in recent months. There are concerns about the burden households could face if interest rates rise. Tell us about the household debt situation.
Even though government has been restraining household loan, which amounts to about 2,000 trillion won, household increase is gaining speed again. According to government, major commercial banks' household loan increased by 1.4% on monthly basis, which is the highest level since November last year. Particularly, credit loan increased more than that of the mortgage loan at 5.1% on monthly basis. This rise of the credit loan is related to finance for stocks in companies' public offering like SKIET, and speculative demand for a loan before implementing new loan regulations like DSR. Since the huge household loan could be one of the largest risk factors of Korean economy, government should be closely watching the changes of it.
All right, Professor, we'll be watching those changes to be sure. Thanks so much for sharing your insights today with us. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The U.S. continues to see reports of random violence against Asian people seemingly on a daily basis. In San Francisco on Tuesday, 2 older Asian women were stabbed at a bus stop, and an Asian man was attacked outside a grocery store while with his 1-year-old son. Jang Tae-hyun reports.
Hate crimes against Asians are a rising problem in the U.S., and on Tuesday, 2 older Asian women were stabbed in downtown San Francisco while standing at a bus stop.
It was a pretty big knife. It got knuckles on the handle, and it got like a blade. The blade has like holes in there, like a military knife.
The women, one who is in her 60s and the other in her 80s, are still in hospital, receiving treatment for multiple stab wounds. The San Francisco Police Department said in a press release on Wednesday that neither are in critical condition. At 7 p.m., 2 hours after the incident, a man named Patrick Thompson was arrested. Police say Thompson faces 2 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of elder abuse. A motive has not yet been determined, but an investigation is underway to decide whether the incident can be treated as a hate crime.
This is something that is happening to Asian people in our community specifically. This is a pattern.
Also in San Francisco on Tuesday, an Asian American father of a 1-year-old child was attacked outside a grocery store. He was with his child waiting to cross the street and was suddenly knocked to the ground after being punched multiple times. The man, who wants to be called Bruce, said that it was very scary seeing his child in the stroller rolling away while he was on the ground. Nearby San Francisco police arrested someone shortly after, a 26-year-old man named Sidney Hammond. The attack appeared to be random, and Hammond is facing charges of assault, face imprisonment, and child endangerment. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
The top diplomats of South Korea and Japan met in London on Wednesday, but they were unable to narrow their differences over historical and environmental issues, including Japan's plan to release radioactive water into the ocean. But meeting together with their U.S. counterpart, the 3 sides did agree to work together on North Korea. Our foreign affairs correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
South Korean Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong met on Wednesday with his Japanese counterpart Toshimitsu Motegi for the first time since taking office, as Seoul-Tokyo ties remain strained over historical issues and other matters. The two-way meeting was held in London right after a trilateral meeting with the U.S. on the sidelines of a G7 ministerial meeting. During the meeting, Chung delivered Seoul's opposition to Japan's plan to discharge radioactive water from Fukushima into the ocean, adding there are deep concerns over Tokyo announcing the plan without enough consultations with its neighbors. They also talked about the thorny historical issues of compensating Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement and forced labor, on which they could not narrow their differences. But Seoul and Tokyo agreed to work together along with Washington on North Korea issues for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. They also pledged to continue communication on pending issues and develop a future-oriented relationship. During their meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the same day, they agreed to keep working together for the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, stressing again the importance of trilateral cooperation toward that goal. Seoul's foreign ministry also said Blinken shared the Biden administration's new policy on North Korea. Now the review is complete. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea has promised to provide Senegal with $21 million in aid to support the country's agricultural development and local startups. The Korea International Cooperation Agency, under the Foreign Ministry, announced that some of the funds will go to developing a greater variety of crops by 2026, while some of it will be used to develop a new model town. As part of the aid will also go to developing a startup incubation program at a tech university in Senegal. After 9 months, construction has been completed on a new tree-lined street in downtown Seoul for pedestrians and cyclists. It's called the Sejong-daero Forest Street, and it runs for 1.5 kilometers from the Sejong-daero intersection to Namdaemun and then to Seoul Station. The roads next to it have been narrowed to make more room on the sidewalk. It's lined with trees and flowers and passes by restaurants, cafes, and several cultural attractions, so it could help boost the local economy. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.